Hi there, it's Natalie. I wanted to record something about this book that I picked up at our local used bookstore, I think last week, at Black Squirrel Books, who are wonderful. This book is called The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell, or Jarrell, I'm not sure, I guess he has the same last name pronunciation problem I do, with decorations by my absolute fave, Maurice Sendak. And I think what I wanted to record today was, I guess, kind of my thoughts about this book and why I think it's useful to reflect on this kind of book as a storyteller. And then I think I might just record one chapter of reading from it. I think that would go over well. They're pleasant to listen to. So I had never heard of this book when I saw it in the bookstore. Never heard of it. It was published in originally 1965. So it caught my attention, obviously, Maurice Sendak, the wonderful writer and illustrator who is best known for his book, Where the Wild Things Are. And then I picked it up and turned it over, and the first thing I see is it's a Newbery Honor book, which is a very prestigious honor for a work of children's literature in the United States. And then the line underneath that, it says, it's from the New York Times Book Review. It says, unmistakably the best in many a year, a timeless and universal story. So already I'm going like, why have I never heard of this before? I'll read you the little synopsis here. It's very short. This is a story of how, one by one, a man found himself a family. Almost nowhere in fiction is there a stranger, dearer, or funnier family, and the life that the members of the animal family live together, there in the wilderness beside the sea, is as extraordinary and as enchanting as the family itself. Right? Sounds kind of classic, I guess, from that first impression. And then there's two further blurbs, which again are just completely effusive. I was really amazed by these. Okay, so this is from P.L. Travers in the New York Times Book Review. Occasionally, very rarely, like the spirit of delight, comes a book that is not so much a book as a kind of visitation. I had not known that I was waiting for the animal family, but when it came, it was as though I had long been expecting it. And then I have a further blurb from the school library journal that says, this tale is the stuff from which a lifetime of dreams and epiphanies is made. If the values to be found in children's literature were, in the future, to be measured against the wealth in this golden fable, we would witness a renaissance which would be applauded by the Brothers Grimm, Hans Andersen, and Lewis Carroll. So to say that this book was well received, it seems, would be an understatement, at least based on what I can gather from the back cover. So, I mean, I don't know if you have this experience, but I had this sort of hope that maybe this is like a forgotten classic, and it's going to be this marvelous serendipitous discovery that I get to have, the kind that you get to have sometimes when you find books in used bookstores, where you end up going like, why? How did I never know about this? This is my new favorite book. And I think for me the interesting thing was it wasn't like that at all. So I've read this book now, The Animal Family, and there's much good that you could say about it. I think in terms of very beautiful language, very beautiful imagery, a kind of soothing, I think, quality to the work, which is why I think I'll read a chapter of it after. But as far as it goes in terms of being a successful work of children's literature, I would argue that this fails. It is not a good work of children's literature, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, as you can see, a lot of people disagree with me. I think the only backup I have in terms of my opinion being the correct one, or at least a valid one, is that I've never heard anyone talk about this book. I've never heard it mentioned, and I like to think that I'm, pretty well immersed in the literary world. And I don't bring this up because it's fun to, dunk on books that are not great. I don't think it is. I don't think that's particularly helpful, but I think what is helpful sometimes, for me as a writer at least, or a storyteller, and as a teacher, is to think about what makes a book effective or not effective, and what exactly it might be in a particular story that isn't working for us. Now this is a story, and you'll see when I read a chapter of it, it's got very kind of beautiful, whimsical details. It's about a hunter who falls in love with a mermaid and brings her into his house, and then they have animal friends. And there's so much, I think, that could have worked really well about that. But there are all kinds of little things, I think, that don't work. First of all, and I'm not going to get into this so much, and this might be kind of my creative writing teacher bias, but there's almost no conflict in this book. The stakes are incredibly low. Sometimes that works in children's literature, but I think what it makes this feel like, and again, this is why I think it might be a nice kind of bedtime story. It makes it feel kind of just like a slice of life kind of book, not like a story per se. Like nothing. There's no risk of loss, really. There's a sense, perhaps, that the characters need to grow and gain things and change, but almost no one has to face their fears in this book. I think further to that, in terms of why it doesn't work really for me as a children's book, is, first off, that there's no child or child-identified character for most of the book. I think sometimes the animals end up kind of filling that role, but to my reading, it reads somewhat like an adult's idea of what a children's book should be. That's not based on what a child might actually enjoy. A kind of a nostalgic feeling of what makes children's literature beautiful. And I realize an example would help, and I think I'll read you a section of it later, and you can make up your own mind. And maybe my biggest tiny gripe with this book, it's a minor thing, but I think it speaks to the larger problem in this book, is that, as I mentioned, it's a book about a man who falls in love with a mermaid and brings her into his house, and she lives on land with him. And they spend a lot of time going between the beach and his house, or even she comes with him sometimes when he goes for walks in the woods. And for myself, the first thing I think about is, what does that look like? What does that look like to have a mermaid on land? I know, if you imagine like a seal so graceful in the ocean, and then when they come on land, they're kind of ridiculous. So often, when the mermaid is, say, moving through a meadow or doing anything else in the world of this story, the author just says that she went across the field, or she followed the hunter across the field. And that's all we get. We have no concrete sense of what it actually looks like for a mermaid to cross a field. And I think it's like that lack of attention to the particulars and to the concrete that for me makes this book feel very abstract. It feels very abstract. It's not set in any clearly specific time or place. I think that's what some of the blurbers are responding to when they refer to it as timeless. I think there's maybe something different between timelessness in terms of story and an abstract time and space free story, and the latter I think is sometimes a problem. Again, I think it brings the story more into the realm of what an adult remembers children's literature being like, rather than what a child actually loves to read. Obviously, this is my opinion, and obviously he received very high praise for this book, and a lot of people must have loved it very much. But yeah, it was an interesting experience for me to read this book, not knowing anything about it except that it had been highly praised, and learning that, or having to reflect on the fact that I don't think this actually works. Despite all that, I do think that this is a very lovely and comforting piece of writing, and for that reason I did want to read a chapter from it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to read the very first chapter. Again, this is called The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell, with decorations by Maurice Sendak. There's an epigraph that says, "Say what you like, but such things do happen. Not often, but they do happen." This first chapter is titled The Hunter. Once upon a time, long, long ago, where the forest runs down to the ocean, a hunter lived all alone in a house made of logs he had chopped for himself and shingles he had split for himself. The house had one room, and at the end closest to the ocean there was a fireplace of pink and gray and green boulders. The hunter had carried them home in his arms from the cliff where the forest ended. On the crushed seashells of the floor there were deer skins and seal skins, and on the bed was the skin of a big black bear. Hanging on the wall over the bed were the hunter's bows and arrows. The hunter, a big, brown-faced man with fair hair and a fair beard, wore trousers and a shirt and shoes of creamy deerskin. His silvery gray cloak was made of the hide of a mountain lion, and the cap he wore when it rained or snowed was the skin of a sea otter. Over the fireplace hung a big brass hunting horn he had found in a wreck the waves washed ashore. He had carved some of the logs of the walls and some of the planks of the chairs into foxes and seals, a lynx and a mountain lion. When he sat at night by the logs blazing in the fireplace, the room looked half golden with firelight and half black with the shadow of the firelight, and the logs would roar and crackle so loudly that they drowned out the sound of the waves on the beach below. But when the logs had burnt to embers, and the embers had burnt away to coals, the man would lie in his bed, warm under the bearskin, and listen to the great, soft sound the waves made over and over. It seemed to him that it was like his mother singing, and before he could remember that his father and mother were dead, and that he lived there all alone, he had drifted off to sleep. And in his sleep, his mother sat by the bed, singing, and his father sat at the fireplace, waxing his bowstring or mending his long white arrows. In spring, the meadow that ran down from the cliff to the beach was all foam white and sea blue with flowers. The hunter looked at it, and it was beautiful. But when he came home, there was no one to tell what he had seen. And if he picked the flowers and brought them home in his hands, there was no one to give them to. And when at evening, past the dark blue shape of a far-off island, the sun sank under the edge of the sea like a red world vanishing. The hunter saw it all, but there was no one to tell what he had seen. One winter night, as he looked at the stars that, blazing coldly, made the belt and the sword of the hunter Orion, a great green meteor went slowly across the sky. The hunter's heart leaped, and he cried, "Look, look!" But there was no one to look. One evening, he was lying on his bed. The soft summer breeze blew in through his open door, and the moonlight lay on the floor by the window like the skin of a white bear. The hunter thought. After a while his thoughts changed to dreams, and his mother was singing to him. But all at once his eyes were open. He was awake, and he could still hear someone singing. He got up and went down through the meadow to the sea. The tide was out. He walked over the warm, wet sand, and the warm, soft waves ran to his feet and died away whispering, in little foaming scallops like the scales of a fish. Out at the seal rocks, hidden in their shadow, something was singing in a soft voice like a woman's. The song had words, but no words the hunter had ever heard before, and the song itself was different from any he had ever heard. He listened for a long time. The song ended on a long, low note, and then everything was silent except the sea, whose shallow silver waves made a little hushing sound and were silent for an instant, and then said, "Hush," again. The hunter called to the singer. From the rock's shadow he heard a quick, scrambling noise, and then the sound of something diving into the water, the sound the seals always made. Shading his eyes with his hands, the hunter stared into the moonlight round the shadow of the rocks. But there was nothing to see, and, now, nothing to hear. After a while, he went home. The next night, when he heard the voice singing, and went down to the shore and listened till its new song was over, and then called softly to it, the singer dived into the water just as before. But this time, as the hunter stared into the moonlight round the rocks, a sleek, wet head came up out of the water, stared at him with shining eyes, and then sank back under and was gone. It was nothing he had ever seen before. Its long, shining hair and shining skin were the same silvery blue-green, the color of the moonlight on the water. As he walked home over the sand of the beach and the grasses of the meadow, the hunter sang to himself, over and over, the last notes of the mermaid's song. All the next day, no matter what he did, he hummed them, and sometimes he would forget them for a few moments and be afraid he had forgotten them for good, but they always came back to him. That night, when the moon rose, the hunter went down to the beach, sat at the edge of the water, and began to sing. He sang, one by one, all the songs he knew, and between each song and the next, he would sing what he remembered of the mermaid's song. He kept looking towards the seal rocks. There was nothing. But after a while he saw, out past the first white line of the waves, a wet head. Slowly, so as not to frighten her, he turned away. He went on singing. When he had almost finished the song, he turned his head a little, and then a little more, till out of the corner of his eye he could see that she had come closer, the moonlight glistened on her hair and on the wet curves of her shoulders. Staring at her sidewise, he sang her own song. But when he was almost at the end, he stopped in the middle of a note. There was silence for a moment. Then he heard a soft little laugh. The mermaid sang him the last notes of the song, and before he could speak or move, she was gone. Her head and shoulders slid under the water so smoothly that 1 minute she was there, and the next she had vanished without a sound, almost without a ripple. The hunter had lived so long with animals that he himself was as patient as an animal. He waited a long time, and then he went home. He was not disappointed that she had gone, only certain she would be back. He kept remembering how the laugh and the last notes of the song had sounded. When he was so nearly asleep that he could hardly tell whether he was remembering them or hearing them, he was still certain that she would be back. After he was fast asleep, neither thinking nor dreaming, he still smiled. And the next night, and the next, and the next, and the next, she was there. She came closer now, sitting in the shallow water, the waves not up to her waist. She talked to the hunter in a voice like the water, in a voice that made no more sense to the hunter than the water. No word of hers was like any word of his. They began to teach each other words. The mermaid would touch her head and make the same sound over and over till the hunter had memorized it. Then he would pat his leg and say, "Leg, leg." And the mermaid, looking as if a leg were a very queer thing, either to have or to have a word for, would repeat the word in her liquid voice. But she could say his sounds so much better than he could say hers, remember his words so much better than he could remember hers, that before long the learning was all one way. The hunter said her words awkwardly and ruefully, like something learned too late, but she said his like an old magician learning a new trick, a trick almost too easy for her to need to learn. The hunter said to her, bewildered, "You never make mistakes." "What is mistakes?" "The wrong word, the wrong sound, one you don't mean to make, the way I do. Mistakes are what I make when I try to talk the way you talk." The mermaid repeated in a satisfied voice, "Mistakes." She had one more word. She told the hunter that the others like her used to come in as far as the seal rocks, but had stopped now that he was on the beach every night. She said, "The sea..." Then she stopped, at a loss for the next word, and said, "You are man. What is 2? What is 3? Men. The sea men, like me, the sea people. The sea people, like me, are afraid of land. Not me. Oh, not me. They think I..." Here she had hesitated, and then said triumphantly, "Make mistakes. Make bad mistakes. They say all good comes from the sea." She struck the water with a cheerful, scornful hand. "Why don't you think that?" The mermaid immediately told him, but in her language, not his. He laughed, and she laughed and wrinkled her nose and forehead, searching for the words, but they wouldn't come. So she said, "Oh well." Whenever she didn't know what to say or how to say it, she would exclaim cheerfully, "Oh well." The hunter couldn't remember ever teaching her to say it, but she had certainly learned. But the next night she had her answer. Her first words were, "The land is new." The hunter gave her a puzzled look. She said swiftly, "They say all good comes from the sea, but the land is new. The land is..." Here she said, one of her own words, and then asked him impatiently, "You have legs, I have not legs. The moon is white, the sky is black. What is that?" "Different?" "Different, different. The land is different." Sometimes the land was so different that the mermaid would learn a word in a few seconds, and after a half-hour's explanation still not know what it meant. One day, the mermaid came to the beach in the daytime now. The hunter pointed up over the meadow and said, in the clear, divided tones of a teacher making something plain, "That is my house." "House," hissed the mermaid. "House." "I sleep in the house, on a bed. I eat in the house, on a table." "Bed," said the mermaid. "Table." But her quick eyes looked strained and hesitant. It was plain that she had no idea what the hunter was talking about. The hunter started cheerfully. "A table's a big flat thing with legs." The mermaid's eyes brightened. She knew what legs meant, and felt very landish for knowing. "That you eat on." "Why do you get on it to eat?" "Oh no, you don't get on it. You put what you're going to eat on it." "Why?" "Well, otherwise you'd have to hold it in your hands." "You don't want to hold it in your hands?" The hunter went on. "Then, beside the table, there's a bed. That's a big flat thing." "Oh yes, like a table." "Well, not like a table exactly. It's made of wood, like that log there, and it has a bear skin on it, and you sleep in it." The log was hollow. As she looked at it, the mermaid saw. You took the log and put a skin around it, and then got inside it and went to sleep. "Ugh," said the mermaid, "I understand the bed." "The bed and the table are both inside the house. The house is a big hollow thing, like the bed." "No, the bed's not hollow." "Then I don't understand the bed." "We'll come back to the bed. The house is a big wooden thing, see how big it is, that you stay inside at night when it rains." "Why?" "To keep from getting wet." "To keep from getting wet?" the mermaid said despairingly. All at once the hunter had an idea. "It's just like a ship," he cried. "Wouldn't it be nice if, instead of just sleeping anywhere, every night you swam inside that wrecked ship by the reef and slept there, and you could stay in it whenever it rained?" The mermaid said softly, in utter amazement, "That's the queerest thing I've ever heard in all my life. You've made a mistake. You must have made a mistake." But usually, whatever the hunter did or said had for the mermaid the glamour of land. She loved it when he shot for her, and would run her hand along the dark bow and white feathery arrows. As she tugged at an arrow shot into driftwood from across the beach, she said admiringly, "I think you could kill anything." One day, the hunter was sitting, fishing. She swam up and said in a pleased, puzzled voice, she loved learning about new things, "What are you doing?" "Fishing." The mermaid looked more puzzled than before, so the hunter explained in several sentences how he did it. She looked at him unbelievingly, and then burst into laughter. "What are you laughing at?" asked the hunter. It's such a roundabout way of catching fish." "What do you want me to do, swim after them and catch them in my mouth?" "You're the only thing I know that doesn't catch them that way. You look so helpless, just sitting there, waiting for one. Tell me what sort you want, and I'll get it for you." For a moment the hunter felt a child's humiliation, but then he laughed, and told her the sort of fish he wanted, and the mermaid got it for him. The next day he brought her a piece of venison, and when she took one bite of it and threw it away, But the day after, he brought her a branch of red maple leaves. The mermaid looked at it as if she couldn't believe it. She carried it and stroked it and said to him lovingly, "It's the best thing I ever had in all my life. Oh, you're so lucky to live on land. The land's so So, for the first time in many days, she couldn't think of the word she wanted, and said, as she had once said so often, "Oh well." By now the mermaid and the hunter were spending most of their time together. His house got to have a random, half-lived-in look, and he hunted mechanically for the next meal or two. The mermaid was used to the meadow now. He and she would sit in the tan fall grass, looking out over the seal rocks to the island, and she would say triumphantly, "I am 150 steps from the ocean. 150 of your steps from the ocean. Do you think any of the others have been so far up on land? Any of them? Oh no. If they saw me now, they'd say," she laughed and used her old word, "What a mistake you've made. Oh, what a mistake you've made." Mistake or not, the mermaid had made it. That fall, she went into the house with the table and the bed, and from then on the sea people saw her only as a visitor from the land that was so, whatever it was. Hope you enjoyed the bedtime story.